Hey guys, welcome back to Sunday School Online as we continue our study of Hebrews. Hope you guys have been blessed by this. And as always, I want to remind you, please watch the previous videos first. Also, a quick reminder, I'm going to encourage you guys to watch this with a friend so you guys can study it together, whether online or in person. Also, please share this and spread this along on social media. Perhaps like it on YouTube. I don't know all the dynamics of that. And follow perhaps the YouTube page as well. Well, today we're going to be in Hebrews 6, an extremely controversial passage. And we're going to be studying a passage. And our study is going to be called, What Belongs to Salvation Today? So I'm going to ask you guys, of course, to read the text on your own. And I will be asking some questions, some of which I will answer. And I will have you guys pause so you guys can answer that on your own as well before listening to mine or not listening to my answers. So for the first question to introduce our study is, what is a Christian like? What is a Christian like? I'll let you guys take that one yourselves. Now, what is a lost person like? So what is a non-Christian like? Hopefully you had some interesting discussion with somebody on that. Now, I want to ask you guys to summarize what we learned last week in our previous study. Okay. Now is the time to go ahead and jump into Hebrews and read our passage. Again, as I say most weeks, our look at the text is based on the English Standard Version today. However, you're welcome to read any of the variety of great translations that are available in the English language or another language. Maybe you read, that you have the Latin Vulgate, probably not. So, or you might have a wide variety of different translations of the Bible. So to start in looking at the text, what were the elementary doctrines that the readers must move past? Some good thoughts there. So I think the elementary doctrines here would be just kind of the doctrine of of God's existence and justification, which is how God has made us right through salvation. I think these are kind of the basics of the Christian life, the things that are things that we would expect of a brand new Christian. Those are the things that the readers in Hebrews should have moved past, as we've seen that they've been Christians for a while. So they should be mature, they should be discerning, they should know a lot about who God is in the Bible. Now, who are the people who do not move on to maturity in verses 4 through 6? Who are these people that Hebrews mentions that don't become mature Christians? This is an incredibly debated passage. And I actually used to, when I was getting ready to, I was a newer Christian, in the later part of high school, I thought that these were people that were Christians that then lost their salvation and were kept as having lost their salvation. They were never able to come back to salvation again. And I think if you read Hebrews 4 through 6 on its own, it's hard to not come to that conclusion. Actually, what's interesting though is on the flip side, you see a lot of people who don't believe you can lose your salvation. I don't believe you can lose your salvation, for the record. They will claim some of these terms like tasting of the heavenly things, that as like expressing a kind of experiencing of the truth, experience of the gospel without really having the gospel. And it actually fails to really understand the original Greek words. These words, even that tasting means the tasting that you have, like when you gorge down a buffet meal, when you down some really delicious pulled pork or ribs or something like that. It's that experience, that consuming end. So I think very, very clearly, Hebrews is referring to Christians, some that were Christians, but are not Christians anymore in that sense, which is troubling if you believe that you can't lose your salvation, but I don't think a contradiction. So then the question should be asked then, were they saved? And if they were saved, did they lose their salvation? To that, I want to clarify my understanding of this. I think a pastor and a theologian named Tom Schreiner does a really good job at this. So it's interesting that if you guys have ever been on a curvy road, that there always will be signs, especially like in the mountains and Appalachians, these signs that tell you basically avoid, be mindful of the hill. They warn you not to get too close to the edge, and because if you get to the edge, you might literally go down the mountain and die, right? And he compares these warnings in Hebrews 6:4-6 to those. Not saying that some people will, but it's in fact encouraging people to make sure that they're truly on the road to begin with, that they're staying on the road to begin with. Actually, he's even brought up that some of such roads have no evidence of people ever going off the road, and the reason why is probably because the signs are there to begin with. And so I think maybe in a lot of ways that's how this passage functioned. That might be a good way to say that he's referring actually to a theoretical loss of salvation, kind of a hypothetical loss of salvation, saying that if you forget this, if you show that you weren't truly saved and your salvation was kind of hypothetical, then be warned, because damnation is what awaits you, that eternity in hell. Others, I think, take this as basically these people gave every appearance of being a Christian. For all intents and purposes, for the people, they were Christians. They were not truly saved by God, and God's all-knowing and knows the heart. But these people had every single possible appearance of being Christians and then walked away. I lean towards the idea of, this being like the road signed. But this is a complicated passage. And so I don't think that anyone has ever lost their salvation, and I don't think people lose their salvation here. And so can you lose your salvation is an important question when we look at this. So obviously I think you cannot lose your salvation. One of the reasons why we see this is because of things like passages in Romans, as well as the Gospel of John. But there's this principle that salvation is not ours to begin with. It was given to us by God. And God is the one that keeps us in that salvation. That the Bible actually teaches in Romans, no one can separate us from the love of God. Nothing, not even our own sin, can separate us from the love of God. And if that is the case, it's clearly impossible that God would stop granting to us his salvation, that we could ever do anything that would stop our relationship with him. Now, it is very, very, very possible that we think that we're saved, but we're not actually saved. So did the author of Hebrews think that his readers were like this, like they were in some danger of this? He's actually explicitly clear. He says he's sure of better things that belong to salvation. The author of Hebrews is confident that those reading this letter are not those who are going to fall away from salvation, those who are going to prove they were never saved to begin with. So what then was the basis for his great confidence in them? It's interesting. It was their work and their love for God. Some people might look and think Hebrews is being legalistic. It's not. And actually, he's seeing that they are producing fruit of salvation. They're producing the actions that come from being saved by God. They were serving even the brotherhood. That's one of their works and love for God that's mentioned, is how they're benefiting other Christians. This, to him, was a demonstration that their faith wasn't just something in their head, but they had been changed. They had been born again. They had become new creations. Now, what should the readers of Hebrews be earnest for, or seek strongly? So he tells them to be earnest for fuller assurance of salvation, for greater knowledge and comfort of knowing that you are truly saved. And this of course comes from not just clearly knowing the truth of the gospel, but also coming from having a life that shows that yes, God has changed me, God is changing me more and more. Who then should these people imitate? He tells these readers of Hebrews that they should imitate those who kind of basically inherited the promise. He's referring, I think, to Christians that have finished the course well. He's referring to Christians that have finished the course well, Christians that are now in paradise, that kept the faith through difficulty unto death. Can we really know then who is saved? Can we know who is really saved? Obviously not perfectly. I know people that gave every evidence of truly being saved that turned out weren't. But I think the vast majority of those who walk away, actually, there was reasons to be suspicious to begin with. And we can know who is really saved according to the Bible by their fruit. We'll know them by their fruit. One of these fruits should be that they're actively involved in church membership. They're plugged into the churches. The church is really meant to be a source that confirms real faith. Now, how do we demonstrate God is at work in us today? We demonstrate it by wanting to obey Him. And not merely actually as I'm trying to earn a reward. We can demonstrate it because we want fruit, because we want to serve. Because I'm not saying that it's it makes us giddy, it makes us get up in the morning, but we see the need and we're willing to do it. We're willing to do that with a happy heart, a joyful heart in the Lord. How can we be earnest then to have the full assurance of salvation? I think a key in this actually is going to be having the assurance from other believers. Making sure that you're in a community where people are keeping a watch on your soul to make sure that you truly know who you are, where you're at spiritually. There's going to be a lot of things. It means fighting your sin more and more, never being content with where you're at spiritually. So now I want to ask you guys, are you guys sluggish in seeking Christian maturity? Are you sluggish in seeking Christian maturity? So we might be in a lot of ways sluggish, in ways that we don't think about. It's easy to just kind of be comfortable in our faith. But we need to be active in making sure that we are constantly growing in Christ as those who have been bought by Christ. Next question, the second to last question rather, is who can you imitate in this faith? Who can you imitate in your Christian walk? I remember a pastor that had fallen into sin and had to leave the ministry. And he kind of became one of those types of people that defends himself for it. And he started mocking actually the movement of Christians that he was in. And he said that they're pathetic, that a lot of these pastors in the movement he was in are pathetic because they want to have as their role models these dead guys. And then he said it's because they've got daddy problems. And obviously he's wrong. Even Hebrews here teaches us that we should follow and imitate those who died and those who follow the faith consistently, because we don't ever know. I've actually had mentors that have failed me substantially. But we can look to great Christian leaders of the past. We can look to a Richard Sibbes of the past, a John Calvin of the past, as men that had their blemishes, but truly did finish their course well. That truly did continue to grow in their faith even unto the end. But also, I want to encourage you, find a godly Christian that's alive that you know. Not somebody that you watch on TV, but somebody in your church that can be a mentor to you, that can push you forward as they're growing forward themselves. And how can you imitate the mature is the last question. We imitate the mature by doing the best that they do, but not doing the worst that they do. In a lot of ways, our imitation should be a process of even seeing their error. It's to follow their practices and to mold our lives upon a foundation that they built upon. We follow them as they follow Christ. In a lot of ways, it's like, you're running a race and you're trying to keep up with the person in the lead. Well, in some ways, if you're in third, you're following the person in second in hopes of eventually surpassing them and heading towards that benchmark in front. That's how we are to imitate the mature. I hope you guys have benefited from this study of Hebrews. And I certainly pray for you guys always have a great week. And I hope school is going wonderful for all of you. God bless.